Grown man on YouTube watching Doctor Who from the very beginning. Well, there's no point in being grown up if you can't be childish sometimes. Hello, welcome back to Marathon Man, where I'm going through Doctor Who from the very beginning, and you join me as we begin a brand new era. Yes, we're on to the 4th Doctor, and it's at points like this where you sort of pause and realise how much ground has been covered to get to this point. So, I mean, in episode count, we are over halfway through the classic series. If you have been a regular viewer on this marathon, then thank you for taking this journey with me. It's been great reading all of your comments. It's been fun when we've disagreed. On the whole, the comments have all been civil, eloquent, articulate. You know, a few have been duly ignored. Right, shall we get on with the 4th Doctor? Let's get on with the 4th Doctor. So associated with the role is Tom Baker now that I've always found it interesting and perhaps a little bit fun to see him finding his way in the role, to view him as the new boy. He is, of course, now the elder statesman of the Doctors, the one which is arguably the most recognisable and has remained so for 5 decades. So seeing him take his first steps can't help but be interesting as a glimpse into the past. Because Tom Baker wasn't always the Doctor. Having him start to be is the beginning of something quite special, and I have no qualms in saying that I find that easily the most rewarding thing about Robot, which, as a story in its own right, I do find quite underwhelming. I think there are several reasons for this, but I think the main one is that the script itself does, sorry Terence, feel quite uninspired. Now, there's absolutely no doubt, obviously, that Terence Dicks could write a story mechanic par excellence. I don't think there was probably a better story mechanic who worked on the classic series better than Terence Dicks. And that is a really laudable skill. Not everybody can do that. The way he could build stories and put scripts together was fantastic. It's also why he was a Dr. Water when it came to script editing. Despite like a few great flourishes, the script for Robot does feel quite workmanlike. I mean, Robot hangs together and it goes from its beginning to its conclusion in a logical and methodical way. It just feels like there's very little inspiration along the way. And sure, you know, there's quite a lot of cliches along that way from beginning to its conclusion. I mean, Terence Dicks is on record as saying that he considered his writing a job and not a hobby. Now, I think maybe he was sort of like playing down how much he perhaps enjoyed that job, but sometimes, and certainly in Robot, it does show that he's doing a job rather than being fired by creative passion. I mean, his Target novelizations, which again, they were a job. I think I can't remember which story it was. I'm sure somebody will tell me in the comments, but I'm sure he managed to get novelize one of the Doctor Who stories in like either under 100 pages or just a little bit over. Now that's a story technician master at work there, being able to take the nuts and bolts of the story and do it that economically. But I feel like if he was fired by the creative impulse, then he wouldn't have made the story that short. And with Robot, I know, because also again I think he's on record as saying that he was the outgoing script editor. He was about to leave a salaried position to go back to being freelance, and so he wanted a job sort of like immediately after that. So he sort of cheekily told Robert Holmes there was a tradition, I think, that the outgoing script editor wrote the very first story under the new one. And I think because he's approaching Robot as a job rather than having a burning desire to write a Doctor Who story, I do think that shows. I mean, his talents as a story engineer are at show in the 5 Doctors as well, where he's got like this huge shopping list that he has to build a story out of, and he manages to, and I guess do justice to the fact that it's an anniversary celebration, while at the same time it does hang together as a coherent story as well. But here he hasn't got quite as large a shopping list. He's got to introduce a new Doctor and a new companion, and because here the shopping list isn't as extensive, it means that there's more story to fill, and I don't always like what he fills the story with. So, for example, the the fashion show that I call it, when the Doctor tries on all those different outfits, I find it excruciating. Like, I find there's no pacing to it. Like, it's an incredibly frustrating watch to me. It's exaggerating the silly. Now, I'm a big fan of silly in Doctor Who, and if there's gonna be silly in Doctor Who, then Tom Baker's the one to do it. But here, it's his first story, and it's so on the nose. And I'm sure kids watching it loved it, and it is for them. But even when I was younger and watched this story, I still didn't really get on board with it. And the punchline, cultivate a sense of urgency.
You must cultivate a sense of urgency.
I don't think that's enough to justify it either, because we've still had a sort of like, the sequence itself has been frustrating, and I get that the Brigadier is frustrated, but why? It's not really why I find it frustrating. I quite like the idea that the Doctor can't decide what to wear, and we get better versions of that later on, I think, in my opinion. What frustrates me is the overtly comic nature of those outfits. It just like, for that sequence to work, it has to hit your funny bone, and it doesn't hit mine. And I only single that scene out because it feels a little bit like a distillation of the vibe I get from the whole story, which is it like sort of like is creaking through the motions with very little inspiration behind it. Like, that scene, it's like they've gone, the Doctor tries on some funny outfits, that's enough. Like, where once Doctor Who used to feel like it was filled with excitement and wonder, in Robot, it feels like it's got targets to meet and is just sort of counting down the hours until it can clock off at 5 p.m. It's a new season, it's the debut of a brand new Doctor and a brave new era, and so, I don't know, it feels like more of a fuss should be made than this, especially as it's sort of like a hangover from the previous regime, who were all about big events to kick off a new season. And while it may be a new beginning in a lot of ways, in terms of a marathon and Doctor Who as an ongoing prospect, this is another story for me that doesn't quite deliver the goods. The fourth in a row, in fact, so it's beginning to feel like it's been quite a while since I had one. And I guess, like, the script being competent but fairly unexciting to me, I guess the same could be said of the direction. Like, I find that well done, but no more than well done. And it all just feels like the story is, as it's happening, is just saying to me, yeah, you know, watch if you want, I'm not bothered. And I mean, that wouldn't be a crime in and of itself. I mean, God knows on this marathon we've had Doctor Who stories pass by, like, in the same kind of unenthused way. But for Robot to continue with this sort of like what I think is an unearned nonchalance, it's a bit of a kick in the teeth to the actors that are in it. Because the performances are really far more energetic than the story that they're in. And it feels like everybody involved in front of the camera, every single actor, is bringing more to the script and the production than the quality of either of those would suggest. Thank God they do, though, because otherwise this story would pass by incredibly painfully. And I realise that I've been fairly negative about the story since this video began. That isn't to say that I dislike Robot. I don't, and that's down to the performers. The think tank crew are suitably shady and sickeningly smug in their own perceived superiority. Not just those high up in the organisation, but also the underlings. I mean, the man working the door at the meeting is great. Utterly sure of himself and his own intellectual prowess, that to ask for a decent review in the paper after having belittled the reporter writing one is perfectly acceptable behaviour to him. Even more satisfying is Sarah giving him an earful.
Well, we're covering a number of fringe organisations, and I'm sure we'll find a place for you. Somewhere between the flying saucer people and the flat earthers.
I mean, that works as a yes moment in the story, but it also serves to remind us that Sarah is a more than capable co-lead of the entire show. Patricia Maynard as Winters and Alec Linstead as Jellicoe, they fall victim slightly to that script that I've been so down on, because as actors they do great work in bringing those characters to life, but on the page it feels like not much work has been put into fleshing them out beyond being boo-hiss baddies with inflated opinions of their own intellect. I mean, Linstead was Osgood in The Demons, so that kind of shows you what range he had. If you stand Jellicoe and Osgood next to each other, they're nothing alike. And so I just feel like if a bit more care had been put in behind the scenes, then everything in front of the camera would have come alive far more than it already does, because everybody in front of the camera is really putting the work in. Additionally, Edward Burnham as Kettlewell is wonderfully weird. It's a great performance, easily this story's best from the guest cast. His little twitches and palpable discomfort of being introduced before the clever Nazis are wonderful, almost as if he's embarrassed that Sarah will see that he was part of the scheme all along. And that is such a lovely way for a villain to play a plot twist. Less "it was me all along" and more "yeah, sorry about that." But these positives are unfortunately not numerous enough to result in a truly great story. And I did think long and hard about drawing this comparison, but the story, Robot, sort of like lumbers along with all the grace and elan of the robot itself. I'm ever so sorry, but the design of K1 I find utterly ridiculous. I just don't see how it's practical and how a genius would settle on that. I mean, as a futuristic-y 1970s science fiction creation, it's exactly as you would expect, but as an unstoppable force, it's just not credible. It's overly cumbersome and, I think, an offender of one of Doctor Who's worst habits, certainly 1970s Doctor Who's output, and that is like the POV. So the show of the 70s so far has got a habit of showing monsters and aliens and robots point of view, and in an effort to sort of like look science fiction and alien and otherworldly or whatever, it always results in a way that I just think is a really impractical way of seeing like how the Silurians got about. I have no idea. And I feel the same about the K1. Maybe just a simple vision screen might have stopped it from walking like it was trying to not trip up. But look, the robot is just meant to look like a big, huge, futuristic-y 1970s sci-fi creation, and I get that. And the suit that Kilgareth is put in will obviously be difficult to walk in. I understand why these things have happened, but I just think a tweak of the design, like Kilgareth never looked like he was about to trip up when he was the cyber controller. I mean, long story short, the robot just doesn't work for me, and the story's called Robot. So, but while I understand that he's not the biggest part of the story, the main objective of this story is to transition into the new leading man. The man who is taking over from John Pertwee, who, lest we forget, was the Doctor for 5 whole years. So, what of this new Doctor? What of Tom Baker, this unknown quantity? Well, maybe this is another dose of sacrilege, but in this story, I find him a very mixed bag. Flashes of inspiration and like utterly wonderful moments where he's toe-to-toe with his predecessors, but others where, I don't know, I just find him absolutely, like, incredibly irritating. Like, babbling gibberish directly after the regeneration and, like I already said, popping in and out to try on these ludicrous outfits. They don't tickle me, they irritate me.
If a square on the hypotenuse equals the sum of the square on the other two sides, why is a mouse when it spins?
That doesn't read to me as natural and lovable eccentricity. To me, it reads like enforced madness and compulsory japery. Now, I also think that that is a script issue, and I refer you to earlier in the video. Not particularly keen on this script. And as such, this story doesn't really provide Tom with enough opportunities to demonstrate that he's the right man for the job this early on. And that's a shame, because when he has the opportunity to sort of like ditch the, I suppose for want of a better term, the regimented balminess in favour of his own looser otherworldliness, he is on fire, like brimming with potential. But while his debut might be a mixed bag, the same really can't be said for him, because he is so good. He makes various offbeat acting choices when interacting with the regulars, and these glimpses are delightful. Unfortunately, hampered by a lacklustre script and production for his debut, he doesn't quite land on his feet as assuredly or as quickly as Pertwee, Hartnell or Troughton did, but through the charisma that he quite clearly has, I do get to the end of Robot convinced that the potential is definitely there. And look, here's the thing. I'm not watching Robot for the first time here. This isn't the first time I've ever seen Tom Baker as the Doctor. But the exercise of doing a marathon and watching it from the very beginning is to have these sort of moments where you relive it. So seeing an actor who's so associated with the role of the Doctor take his first baby steps in the role is endlessly fascinating. And that's what I mean by potential, because, spoiler alert, he fulfilled it and then some, didn't he? It's not like I'm saying that Tom Baker has got some way to go to convince me. It's just that when I watch Robot, it's really interesting seeing how he doesn't have the command, like on the role and on the show, that the previous Doctors did, purely because of their longevity. So Tom Baker, who's the elder statesman of the Doctors now, he's the longest serving Doctor on TV. At this point in the show, he's the new boy, and it's really interesting watching him be that. Clip shows and retrospectives will make a fuss about these moments.
You may be a doctor, but I'm the doctor. The definite article, you might say.
Look here, Doctor, you're not fit.
Not fit, not fit. Of course I'm fit. All systems go.
But it's the scene at the very end where Harry joins the Doctor and Sarah that really show what Tom Baker is capable of.
You wouldn't like to step inside a moment, just to demonstrate that it is all an illusion?
Well, if you think it'll do any good.
Oh yes, it'll make me feel a lot better.
Alien, welcoming, mysterious, and with a confidence to wonder the stars. Ian Marter as Harry is the other new arrival, and if I may say so, he's a really good one. If Tom Baker is shortchanged by the story, then of course Harry is as well, but he's so winningly played by Ian Marter that the idea of him being thrown into the TARDIS family, it's a choice I wholeheartedly approve of. And in a strange way, it helps to cement Tom as definitively the Doctor. Sure, he's the new Doctor, but one of the reasons this series used to use companions as crossovers was to fix the new Doctor as the Doctor we've known and loved. So to have Sarah still around, and more crucially, be seemingly firmly part of a unit with the Doctor enough to welcome a new arrival, it makes it feel in some way like the fourth Doctor has always been around, and Harry Sullivan is the new blood. And I really like that. This is Tom Baker's first story as the Doctor, but with it also being Ian Marter's first story as Harry, then it makes Tom Baker feel more in command of the show by giving him a new companion at the same time as having Sarah be a holdover from the third Doctor. It cements him as the same man. So, not the swaggering beginning to a Doctor's reign that I hoped for. And it seems really strange to say this of Tom, but he isn't the Doctor at this point. Not yet. And it seems even odder to say that I miss Pertwee, but I do. 385 episodes there now, and we've broken the seal on our fourth Doctor. An inauspicious beginning and teetering on the brink of being another dud, but not quite, thanks to basically the cast. But given that this is the fourth story in a row that I haven't sort of like unequivocally enjoyed, I'm keen to plough on and get to know our new boy a lot better.
Well, naturally enough, the only country that could be trusted with such a role was Great Britain.
Well, naturally. I mean, the rest were all foreigners.
Well, exactly.
Right, I know I've banged on about it, but I do think it's too broad to just cite the script. And because it's not a bad script. I know it sounds like I think it is, but I suppose my biggest problem is that it never gets out of, let's say, third gear. It's a workman-like script, and the nuts and bolts of it all bolts together perfectly well, and it's sort of like rigid. It doesn't fall apart. It's just lacking that sort of like verve and inspiration that I really would have liked to kick off a new era. So I'm not going to cite the script. Instead, I'm going to cite the toy tank. As ever, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this robotised King Kong, then you know how YouTube works. Please do hit the like thumb and spread the word. I would be immensely grateful. And what do you think of Robot? Am I being unfathomably harsh, or is it a bit of a damp squib? Does Tom Baker swoop in fully formed as the Doctor, or does he have a little bit to go before he reaches true greatness? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you back here soon for Harry's first trip into space. So if you don't want to miss that, hit the subscribe button, clang the cloister bell, and I'll meet you on Space Station Nerva.